The Tradewise Gibraltar chess tournament finished yesterday in Gibraltar, and this tournament has grown in reputation over the years and is now arguably the most successful and most popular open tournament in the world. It's not just the fantastic location of Gibraltar, spectacular location on the tip of Spain, on the Med, looking across to Africa, but also the calibre of players that it attracts, and also the sense of fun during the tournament. Tournament organised by the English Grandmaster Stuart Conquest, and he's really stamped his own sense of fun and good organisation on this tournament, and it's arguably, one of the best tournaments in the world now. So last round yesterday, and there was a little bit of a scandal that many of you have probably heard about by now. People have asked me to comment on this very fine game between Ho Ifan and Lalith Babu, Indian player. This was the game, and in this position Ifan resigned. Obviously not a proper game. Ifan was making some kind of protest. A lot of people asked me to comment on this. I haven't got a lot to say really, but I will state my view. Very peculiar protest. Ifan was protesting against the pairings. She received 7 women players in the 10 rounds that she played, and wasn't happy with that. But the pairings are done by computer. There's nothing underhand at all. And anyway, what's wrong with playing against 7 women? This tournament prides itself on inviting lots of women to the tournament. They have a special women's prize, which was won this year. The £15,000 first prize for the best woman player was won this year by Ju Wenjun, Ho Ifan's compatriot. Ju Wenjun defeated Ho Ifan in the tournament. Ifan was upset, and this was her way of demonstrating it. But it seems pretty poor form to me. I really like Ifan. She normally is very polite and very diplomatic, and this seems to me to be very uncharacteristic of her. I think she only harmed herself by doing this. Okay, moving on from that. I don't want it to detract from a really exciting last round. There was a 3-way tie for first place. Spanish player David Anton, young Spanish player, Hikaru Nakamura and Yu Yangyi all had 8 points out of 10, and they had a playoff. Because David Anton had the best rating performance, then Nakamura and Yu played off first in a kind of one semi-final, and Nakamura won that. He defeated Yangyi, and so Nakamura and Anton played 2-game rapid play match. First game was drawn, but Hikaru, well, as expected, I mean, he's a fantastic rapid play player, absolutely brilliant rapid player, and he took control in the second game. Let me just show you the very end of this game. Nakamura with white, and he's managed to stymie Black's rooks on the queen side with this knight and this pawn. He has a nice space advantage, and the king side has opened up for the heavy pieces. But Nakamura's next move was really special. Now bear in mind, this is a rapid play game, so this is pretty impressive. He played the queen to f1, and this is an absolutely superb move. If he doesn't play this, then it still wasn't very clear. Point of the move to be able to switch the rook to the h-file, but also it looks at the rook on a6. So just for a moment, Black does not have time to switch the rook on a8 over, because it still has to keep protecting the rook on a6. So queen f1 is a really clever move, looking at both sides of the board. I thought the most natural move would be to play rook b6 to try and get a little bit of counterplay. But there's a problem with that move. Rook h3. Let me show you this. And this is a force variation. So queen g2, threatening mate here. The queen has to block. And now this is a nice switch. Queen c2. Beautiful. This is what happens when you have a space advantage. You can shift your pieces very easily across the board. So the queen's attacked. The queen moves. And now rook takes knight. And it's forced checkmate. Queen takes, crashes in on this side of the board, but switches back across. And there we go. It's the old laser beam checkmate, as I like to say. Okay, so back we go. Back to the position after queen f1, looking at that rook. So the rook switched back here, trying to step out of the queen's line. But of course, the rook's not very active. Rook h3. Now queen g2 is probably the quickest win, but queen e2, super solid. Remember, it's rapid play, you can't calculate too much. Queen e2 is just a good move as well. And here, rook g8 is a slip, but black's position is lost anyway. And now Hikaru crashed through. I think he'd foreseen this one, actually. And it's a nice little tactic to win. So just trade off. And with an extra knight, this is very simple to win, and Hikaru won after another 10 moves. So Hikaru, a deserved winner of this rapid play tiebreaks. Impressive that he had to defeat Yu Yangyi first, and then David Anton. But Hikaru, I think, quite generously after this tiebreak, said that David Anton had played the best tournament. Without a doubt. So, yeah, it was nice for him to say that. But, yeah, Hikaru deadly in the playoffs. I just want to show you a very strange tactic that occurred 3 times in this tournament. I mean, I could pick out so many highlights of this tournament. But I want to show you this. This is quite extraordinary. And we start with the game from the first round. David Anton is black. And in this position, he is a piece up. You can see he has an extra bishop. But white has 2 pawns for the piece and a little bit of play with his heavy pieces. Should be winning for black. But the secret of good technique is good calculation. And watch this next move. Rook takes f2. This was well calculated because you have to work out what happens after rook takes pawn. Well, in fact, there is a quiet move. You can just block the diagonal here with queen to e6. But here's a nice bit of calculation. Queen takes b8, allowing a discovered check with the rook. But the king steps away, and if rook takes, then of course rook here is a nice back rank checkmate. Okay, that one's pretty easy. But watch this one. Now this is pretty special. Now this was from the 7th round. And this is Ho Yifan with black. Now, a long time ago, straight out of the opening, she sacrificed her queen for 2 minor pieces. So Yifan has bishop and knight against the queen. And so it's a positional queen sacrifice, really. But in sacrificing that queen, she managed to lock a minor piece here on f3, and that means that white's king is in permanent trouble. And black is if you sacrifice your queen, normally you need a pretty solid position, and black has that. Nevertheless, we're coming to the crunch moment where white also has counterplay. White's pieces are active, and you need to calculate really precisely. Well, watch what happened. This is pretty spectacular. First of all, h3 check. So the king drops. And knight takes bishop. If king takes, then suddenly we're in. Bishop f3, and the pawn is rolling home. Well, it's a threatening mate immediately, of course. But white played rook takes pawn. So this opens things up. Now this is starting to look a bit hairy. But Ifan had calculated brilliantly. First of all, if rook takes, then suddenly the tables have turned and it's white that is winning this position. Black's coordination has now gone. But Ifan had worked it all out. She played bishop check. Of course, if the king takes the knight, then bishop check takes the rook. So the king stepped to the side. And now, incredibly, knight takes bishop. Again, rook takes isn't good enough. White is actually doing pretty well in this position, incredibly. But coming back to this position, so just a reminder that queen is on the same line as the king, but Ifan played knight takes rook. Rook takes rook, so black has allowed a double discovered check. But in fact, black's king can safely run up the board. This is quite remarkable and very well calculated. And actually, white has no decent defense. There's all kinds of things going on here, and well, the game finished like this: rook e8, rook takes, check, king h4. Well, if queen takes, then this one rolls through. So king takes knight, and now rook d8. So the king gets chopped from the other side now, not just the h-pawn. Check, king g4, and on the next turn, rook d1. Now that's how I'd like to remember Hou Yifan from the tournament. Just a brilliant game. If there's a best game prize, then that would be a very strong candidate. Okay, let's go to a game, Michael Adams against Sethamuran, and this was played in round 9. Again, remarkable coincidence. So let's just go back a little bit. Well, this arose from an English. You can see white has pressure here. I mean, you could say that this game almost has the character of a French defense, actually, with colours reversed, where black has this pawn chain here. And you can see that white has a little bit of pressure on the pawn on d5. And that increases with this move, bishop e5. So white wants to allow the knight into f4 and more pressure on that d-pawn. Now it starts to get very tactical. Knight to g4. So that black is hoping for this trade, and then, well, the knight can drop back here, and that secures the center, and that should be okay for black. But Mickey plunged in, bishop takes pawn, rook g8, and now the bishop came back to e5. So the good news from white's point of view is that now black's king can't castle on the king side. Black recaptures the pawn. Now things start to open up. Rook d1. So there's still a lot of pressure on black's central position, and this bishop could also come into play. Bishop e6. And now things really hot up. Knight takes pawn, so that exploits the pin on the d-file. But it's not that simple. I mean, if the position stabilizes, then white is simply better here. Well, white is a pawn up for a start, but you know, black's king is not looking good, black's pawns are shattered. But queen c8 is very tricky. The knight is on prise on e4. This knight is on prise on h3. But Mickey thought he had it all worked out. Knight f4. If that's taken, then check is winning for white. So back we go. Pawn takes knight. So that opens this up. Whoops. I overshot there. Queen b5 check. Knight d7. And here Well, it's probably best to take this off. And in this position, white certainly has compensation for the exchange. 2 pawns. I mean, I would say white is better here because of this very compact position. But instead of that, Mickey played rook takes knight. And black took. And here, well, things turned out very well for white. He sacrificed the exchange, but has 2 pawns, beautifully compact king position. There's pressure here, and Mickey duly went on to win this game. But if we go back here, so Mickey's just played rook takes knight. Black could have played bishop f4, once again allowing a discovered check. So this is the big theme. So you're probably realizing by now. And incredibly, there's no way for white to use this. So for example, rook d1 check, bishop d7 hits the queen. Queen has to go back, and black is a piece up. Remember, there's a pin here. Or let me see, if rook c7 check, bishop back, rook takes. So black has given up the queen, but now there's a threat to check here, that's checkmate, and also a threat to take the queen. So remarkably, if I go back to this position, this move should be winning for black. An incredible coincidence. So there are 3 games in this tournament that feature this unusual tactic where one side allows a seemingly devastating discovered attack. Well, that's just a few snippets from this incredible tournament. If you want full details and full reports, then do go to chessbase.com, where you'll find videos and game annotations and full details of what happened in the tournament. Thanks for watching.